Değerli misafirlerimiz, İstanbul Tasarım Zirvesi Design and Innovation oturumuyla devam etmektedir. Sizlere bu oturumda tecrübelerini aktaracak konuşmacılarımızı takdim etmek istiyorum. İstanbul Innovation Institute ve Team İnosuit Akademik Koordinatörü Sayın Doktor Merih Pasin'i oturumun moderatörlüğünü yapmak adına sahneye davet ediyorum. Atölye ortak kurucusu ve tasarım sorumlusu Sayın Engin Ayaz'ı sahneye davet ediyorum. Sanatçı ve eğitmen Sayın Akbay'ı sahneye davet ediyorum. Lund Üniversitesi öğretim görevlisi Sayın Jasjit Singh'i sahneye davet ediyorum. I would like to invite Mr. Jasjit Singh, Lund University Professor. Sevgili konuklar, oturum boyunca East Design City ve UNESCO City of Design hashtag ile Twitter ve Instagram'da paylaşım yapabilirsiniz. Dear guests, during the panel you can share your post by using East Design City and UNESCO City of Design hashtag.
I asked to myself, well, this is such a big, broad topic, and you can have different angles approaching to the same topic. So, I am by education aerospace engineer, and I work on corporate innovation systems. For me, design and innovation means in a corporate innovation system, you incorporate design activity into the system as well. But of course, I will just introduce you my other panelists. They don't agree with that. Because I am the odd one out. I am the only one, I guess, is not doing design, just doing innovation. And from the educational point of view, besides me, there is only one more engineer, Engin. And he's also an architect, so semi-engineer, let's call it. I'd like to introduce you my panelist first. Akbay. Actually, he calls himself artist and instructor, but I think it's much beyond that, as far as I know, Bager. He studied in communication design, Istanbul, and interfaces culture at Linz Art University, Austria. After those studies, he was an actor in black theater and puppeteer. Then he started lecturing at the universities on his fields. He did some consultancies to companies, and now he has a creation space, I call it, right?
Yeah, Creative Hub.
Creative Hub at İskele 47, which happens to be our neighbor at the Istanbul Innovation Institute. So, welcome. My second guest is Jasjit Singh. He is from Lund University, professor of industrial design. Well, I am just looking at his background. He is describing himself a versatile design practitioner, educator, and creative thinker, a specialist in the area of form, user experience, and semantics. And he works on crossover domain of industrial, transportation, and spatial design. In other words, hardcore designer and educator. His graduation is from Institute of Design in India. There, he has now more than 20 years of experience in design profession, in automobiles, healthcare, digital, and actually, one of the things that we've been chatting during the lunch, he did some research on color systems, which was amazing. How do you create 1,000 colors? That's what he worked on. Then, he started teaching at the India's National Institute of Design, and in 2005, he joined UMIA Institute of Design in Sweden, focusing on the form and styling practices with user experience and semantic approaches in product design. He is currently professor in the Lund University of Industrial Design since 2010. He has been consultant, advisor, and visiting faculty in several prestigious design schools of international repute and leading design offices in Europe and India. My last guest, but not least guest, is Engin Ayaz. He is the co-founder of ATÖLYE Istanbul. Probably you all know. He is the one that is touching engineering a bit. He is a civil engineer and also architect. He did his civil engineering and architectural design from Stanford University. Then he joined US EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, and Merih Foundation to develop green building projects. He worked as a sustainable design consultant for international engineering and architectural firm, European and American offices. He worked part-time assistant in the California College of Arts and Copenhagen Institute of Interaction Design. And he recently completed master's degree, I understand, at the New York University's Tisch School of Arts. He is working as a part-time instructor at College of Architecture of Bilgi University. Well, once you have such a broad background and with such a wide topic of design and innovation, I think we'll have a very lovely discussion together. Well, we want to start with Bager, because he drew the short stick. Well, Bager, since we are talking about such a broad topic, but to narrow it down, one question that comes to my mind is, lately, maker movement is an interesting movement that's happening, I said lately, but probably last 5 years at least, maybe more. How do you see maker movement will play a role in design and innovation?
Yeah, I mean, it's very good for the kids especially, or the newcomers, like early comers. It's very good, like, because you don't have to really, in design field, it's more elite and more academic, I would say. You have to learn how to design. In maker movement, you just have to do it. So you learn by doing. In fact, this is very old traditional from like ancient Greeks. It comes from the techne approach, I would say. The techne is like they have art schools, which you call technik school, which is like you learn by doing. So it's very similar to that. But the way maker movement was, became popular, that's an important part of it. It was in US, so it was from a magazine. It was a real comeback of the DIY culture, I would say. So anyone can become a maker was the motto. You can create anything you want. So it was an easier way to get in. But when people start going to the maker fairs, start creating, they, of course, have to learn about design, engineering, or like science or art. They can go into various fields. It's so nice, so the kids especially can learn these techniques without knowing that it's a part of a greater field. So it doesn't have a pressure, it's easy to start. But afterwards they just say, okay, this helped me, but now I have to choose a path, because they're like, you can take some design courses online, or you can take some engineering courses online and just relate with it. So in Turkey, I would say maker movement did its job already, and it's gonna slow down in the next 5 years. So it just made lots of people produce things, which was good. So, and innovation is a part of it, because in maker movement you just do for the sake of doing only. So there it's a possibility that it's gonna be an original thing. I don't like the strong relationship with the maker movement and the startup ecosystem, because it just, like you just do something and suddenly someone comes, okay, you have to scale it, you have to do business out of it. And this is a bit boring, because it just gives a pressure. And it shouldn't be like this. So it should be just a hobby. You can start, but then your hobby, if you are creating something and people love it, then it can turn into a business or something else. So it should be more on the flow, I would say. So this is basically, so it's a nice way for especially the young people to start, or like people who doesn't want to, like, I mean, lots of people who have studied engineering wouldn't call themselves designer, like you didn't, for example. And this is also important. So maker movement doesn't force you to call you something, and it's very easy to do. And like we can see, especially girls are more into maker movement than engineering, which is very nice, because I think girls were into, like women were into engineering before, and somehow men pushed them out. And so a maker movement has more this gender balance, which is also a nice part of it.
Actually, that brings me an interesting question. I strongly believe that every engineer should have more or less a design course. So it should be part of the education. So you think that this part of the, being part of the education approach, in that maker also can play a role, maker moment?
Yes, in fact, this is like the old terms. Like these, when we say design and engineer, I accept them as the words of 20th century. And they're not holistic. They try to be holistic. In fact, design has this thing more than engineering. Design can accept engineering easier than engineer accepting design. But this kind of things like maker movement, they're more holistic, so that you can do whatever you want. So in a classroom with like primary school or secondary school or even university, it's nice to, like, if you go to any industrial design university, you just see that they're already a part of the maker movement by the definition. Because they do contests with each other, they do design small stuff, and they, you know, they produce and they test it. So, but it was hard in the beginning. Most of the universities didn't want to accept it directly because it was more like a grassroots thing. So this is the war of being an elite, or like, you know, you want to create it with no barrier and stuff. That was the problem, I think.
Okay. Actually, just I want to follow up on that education stuff, education topic, Jasjit. One of the things that comes, you're being a professor in the university, how do you ensure that innovative design is part of the design education? Of course, that's a follow-up question that comes to mind is every design innovative? How is the relation between design and innovation?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question for many of us who are in the design profession to realize where does innovation come in the design process, and my answer to that would be that innovation is embedded in the design process, and right from the word go, the moment you get a brief. If you're a professional designer, the moment you get a brief from the client, of course you will use your design flavor and characteristics, but you would need the innovation path to move forward. And what was your second question?
Well, are all our designs are innovative?
Yes and no. It depends on the context. Many times design becomes very run-of-the-mill, and that's one challenge we are facing in the industry, in making designers. There is a great segmentation. People are just trying to recreate, reinvent things without really questioning. But the other part is important that, of course, if you are a designer, then you have to be different. You have to ask the right questions. Try to see what is your contribution as a designer so that the products which come out from you are definitely showing surprises, giving new experiences. So definitely, it is very important for us as designers to be innovative. And as I said in the first part of my answer, that innovation is embedded. It's very hard for us to really at times draw the line because, as I said, that right from the very word go, I would say stay curious, be anxious, look for the right question or the big question, and that's where you can make the difference.
Well, as an educator, how would you elaborate on the maker movement, for example, in the university place? How would you integrate that into the formal education, or can you call anything as a formal education? What should be the education look like for the future? We need to design a new education as well, since we are a designer.
Yeah, especially after listening to your thoughts, I think innovation provides designers and design educators an opportunity to rethink design schools of today. We're talking about design innovation centers and all these things. And I would probably already put this question out in the audience that why can't this design innovation center already be a teaching or a learning environment? That there are various stakeholders. A student is also a stakeholder. You come in, you definitely have some set of skills. I always say that I learn a lot from my students. They all carry their own set of skills. But at the same time, I as a teacher, or everyone as a teacher, is also contributing to this whole movement. At this point, we call it the movement of design education, or I would say innovative design education model. And that's the thing, that probably innovation helps us to think different. But remember, innovation is an opportunity, and design is the fuel. And curiosity is the food for design. So we need all of these. And yes, we need innovation all the time. Opportunity is always there. So the moment it was said in the morning that there's going to be a design innovation center, hello, opportunity is right in front of you. It's right on your door. Now it's your time to think how not to go inside the box, not to call it a design innovation center, but rethink how can we do this differently. So it's right there. So what's guiding it? It's not only innovation. It's the creative side of the designer. So you also have to remember, as a designer, you are also a creative strategist. And as a designer, you're also an innovation thinker or innovation manager, an innovation implementer. So definitely, there's a great opportunity waiting.
Okay. Actually, before the meeting, we were having a discussion during lunch. As I was saying, I am working on the field of corporate innovation systems. So for me, somebody who is managing corporate innovation systems is in the center. For you, somebody who is in the design is in the center, and we agreed that there is no center in the process, right? There is no center, because this is completely holistic approach on the innovation and design, both in corporate level and also city level as well, right?
Yeah, I think just to continue on that, back in maybe 10 years back, if you read the definition of design by ICSID, that's the International Council for Society of Industrial Design, now we call it WDO, World Design Organization, they said design is actually a central factor in innovative humanization of technology, or culture, sustainability and economics. And talking about these centers, as I said, everyone is a stakeholder. You as a student are also a stakeholder in the education process. I would say, if you are my students, some of you, then you are our products. You are also our messengers. So we have to respect you for that. And here, I think it's very, very important how these centers are going to shift. They're very contextual. So in a way, if you are running an innovation company, I can easily challenge you that by design, we can make you rethink your innovation process. So, and maybe some of you will agree with me that that's the power of design, that it makes you that creative strategist to rethink.
Okay, thank you. Well, Engin, since we were talking about innovation in the cities, as we know, you are a co-founder of ATÖLYE Istanbul, which is a co-creation hub. So the question will be relevant to that, obviously. So my question is, the creative hubs are popping. Iskele 47 is one of them, popping in Istanbul and in every city. So, but also we know that in the city, we need to create an innovation environment, a creative environment, a design environment to actually cultivate the city itself. So how do you think, what kind of role, in other words, these co-creative hubs will play in the city innovation footprint?
Thank you. I think there are three angles to that question. One is, and probably the most important one, is the angle of the human capacity, what people choose to do in their work life and then free life, and then how these new emergent physical spaces serve their needs. And there are multiple global vectors, global trends that really push the agenda towards an increased need for such hybrid, flexible spaces. Even the word creative hub has a certain signifying element. It says something, but it limits and leaves other things out. Co-working spaces, innovation centers. So maybe it's just best to think of it as what is the infrastructure and superstructure that is needed to serve the needs of the individuals. And there, one big vector is the rise of the freelancer economy. Globally, the numbers are striking, and also in Turkey we see a similar thing mirrored, maybe with a few years of delay. That means as a freelancer, you do need even more of a support network than even if you were in a company. And that support network doesn't really come if you just have some friends around you. You need both people from your discipline that contribute to your craft, as well as people from other disciplines that contribute to your continuous learning. Because recently we have started a new project with European Union and British Council on the slash economy, and that's basically the persona of not being just a graphic designer or an architect, but slash a yoga teacher and maybe a dog walker, who knows. So even one freelancer identity is now being fragmented into multiple activities, and people won't exist in very near future in the 9-to-5 jobs in large companies. These will be more dissolved individual entities that choose to collaborate in however form they want. And in ATÖLYE, we've been exploring this track for about 5-6 years in the thinking terrain, and more 3.5-4 years in where we are in Bomontiada. And we're seeing just like a tidal wave of a rise of both general interest in what these spaces have to offer, and then also in the sheer number of applications we get, because more people are just quitting their jobs and then saying, I'm going to explore my own path forward, and what can you do in my journey to help me learn and be part of a larger community. The other one is the challenge that companies have. Companies also have struggled quite a bit to hold on to their most talented employees, because the learning journey of an employee remains relatively limited in the bureaucratic political games that a company usually kind of surrounds yourself with. And then therefore they are in increased need of design consultancies who can think on a strategic level, on an innovation level, on working with their HR or whatever department they have. But then they also realize it's not enough to just outsource the ideas to a consultancy. You need to also build capacity within. And in this case, the Creative Hub, along with a design studio, can offer this interesting mix where the traditional consultant model is get 3-4 very smart people into the company, book them a room, and then they sit in the room, they crunch numbers, talk to people, and then magically they transform something over a few months. What if you flip the equation and then were to say, well, what if you just take the 20-30 most promising employees in a company, in a university, in any organization, let them hang out and sit within ATÖLYE or any Creative Hub, so that through kind of osmosis, through diffusion, they sense what it is to be in a different environment. And that is, we argue, much more of a transformative journey than having that intellectual transfer, which is the previous mental model of consulting. Today, it's more so of what you surround people with, and these spaces, I think, can offer another way of changing organizations as well. And I think the third aspect there is the global connectivity aspect. We happen to be in Istanbul, and we do have maybe 150 members with about 20-25 international members, but actually we just happen to be here. The same space could have existed in Helsinki, in Barcelona, or in Taiwan, and it actually doesn't look that different. In fact, we have very meaningful partnerships, not just something that just looks good on paper or full of logos, but where a member from ATÖLYE can go to Barcelona and work for free for 2 weeks in the partner organization that we have there. And then he can actually find meaning in this new city through the new creative hub that he immediately belongs to. So that old traditional model of, yes, we're defining boundaries by cities, by nations, that's also completely dissolving. So I think on an individual scale, on an organizational scale, and on a more global connectivity scale, there's a huge shift that's happening, and we're just part of that journey. This is not an innovative idea in its own right. It's just one implementation of it, and there are many other beautiful ones.
Okay. Actually, that strikes me a point to my field as well. Because when we are designing a corporate innovation system, we are changing the definition of corporates. Because now corporate borders are permeable. They are not borders anymore. They are going inward and outward. Because now every corporate is living in an ecosystem, which includes outer parts, outer talents. So they need to know how to use them for the benefit of their business. That will include actually the ecosystem usage that you are describing as well. Now, one follow-up question will be, being in Istanbul, you said just could be another city as well, but you happen to be in Istanbul. So what are the advantages and disadvantages of being in Istanbul?
That's a great question.
Instead of anywhere in the world.
Let's start with the good side.
Let's go with the positives. Yeah.
I think like these spaces or any company, any idea is built on a small group of good people coming together. So it's just not that different in the case of Istanbul, because there is a beautiful hinterland of very good universities that actually, and there's also a huge mass of young people that go to these universities. There is actually a lot of people who are graduating with extraordinary capacity, and that, we start on a very good place, I think, in that case, and then you were just saying that some of these students come to Sweden and are extraordinary in their performance, which I'm not surprised about at all. So,
sorry for interrupting you, but we will inform the audience as well. We were just talking with Jasjit. It so happens that in Sweden, there are quite a number of Turkish students working as designers, right? We didn't know about that.
Yeah.
We were surprised.
So that's one thing. The other thing is when you look at the future, you just need to look at the heritage just as much, because I think it's a symmetrical equation, and the roots that Istanbul is built in, and its geographic location, cliche as it may be, design is about bridging different ideas together, and this place being used to having the flow of ideas and people because of its native geographical form, I think it does make a difference. And there may be political ups and downs, there may be economic ups and downs, but you don't change geography, you can't. And I think that that aspect of it will be a differentiator in decades to come. There's no change there. On the flip side, I think one big struggle is something maybe a bit more abstract. It's how much people trust each other. Where Turkey ranks lowest in the global rankings, or in the last, like, maybe 5 percentile, is the Global Trust Index, which you know, is quite a reputable ranking system. It's not just based on a few simple questions. And I think we also live it day to day. I think it's the same root cause why the entrepreneurship and the investment ecosystem doesn't flourish as easily, because there isn't sufficient trust among investors, or between startups, or within the startup if they haven't worked together for a long time. There isn't enough trust between companies and new, small, emerging, maybe startups, and how that service transaction happens. And overall, I think that's also why ATÖLYE tends to make sense, because yes, we only have 150 people, but we have 150 people who fully trust each other, and that is rare to come by. And I think there are definitely design questions to be asked how that can be overcome. Technology accelerates trust building, because you can have a reputation system online, ranking systems, but it doesn't fully compensate for it. So rather than any political or economic context, I think it's something that is much more also possibly related to geography, because it is people in flux. You just build a different type of relationship with your surroundings, and you just need longer time to acclimatize in a way, maybe.
Okay, great. Actually, that trust issue also something that I actually stumbled on when I was director for Innovent, because we were trying to find fund for our startups, and it was amazing how difficult it was to convince people. Well, Bager, we come to you actually on your one of the favorite subject, which is artificial intelligence. What I would like to do actually first introduce them, Deniz Yıldız. Maybe some, not all of them know shortly, but the real question will be actually after your introduction of Deniz Yıldız. How do you see artificial intelligence will play a role in design and creation? And I will ask you a question that will probably cause debate for hours, but we don't have hours. Do you think it will diminish or actually minimize the human involvement on design and innovation?
Okay, I think like artificial intelligence is a hype word, and it's in the summer of artificial intelligence now. We talk about it too much, but in fact, a winter is probably coming, and we're gonna forget it for a while. That's what I believe. And so if we take in the perspective of, okay, human with a tool, like we have to think like, okay, there's a human, and a human is doing something with a tool. That could be anything, like, you know, you could have a hammer and just, you know, do something, or you could just have like a camera and just shoot some photos. So, in fact, this is a very similar problem. We have to understand if the human has more control of the output than the tool. And that depends on the human perspective. Like, you know, if you know the tool well, that's what we call expertise, then you can use the tool as you want to use. If you don't know the tool well, then the tool can direct you and change the way you use. I can really easily give some examples. Like 30, 40 years ago, almost all the photographs taken were bad. I remember in my childhood, like all the photos were bad and no one could take photos, and it was really hard to take good photos. But now, like when we open an Instagram and you see everyone is doing great with photos. So now there we have to question if the humans have changed or the tools have changed. Like if the tools have the control or the humans have the control. So if there's a lens in the camera which does amazing work, there's an amazing engineering and design of the whole experience. It takes the light from the out and makes it digital in a form that you would love. So it's not real, in fact. When you're taking a photo, the camera just transforms a lot, so it would look good to you. So there, and in fact, like when we talk in AI, we just think of a supersonic robot doing something. In fact, our camera, they have AI in it. So it's just another version of Photoshop, I would say, an AI tool. Now already Adobe products are integrating some kind of artificial intelligence or machine learning tools inside them. So it won't change much. But this is a discussion of human, cyborg, and artificial intelligence. So we have to really understand these terms. Like human is just human, and cyborg is almost what we are now. So it's human plus the machine. And the machine itself is the third thing. I think we are really far from the machine itself version of it, but it's coming slowly. Okay, we can see the progression, but we're not there yet. Still the author, the person who is creating or designing, has the control of the system. But when you are like new in a field, just think of the first guy just learning Photoshop and just using some filters and then sends it to a friend because they've done an amazing design, and the friends can see the filters, the artifacts of the filters and everything on the design, and says, okay, this is an outcome of the tool, not you. So we have this. But after a while, in like usage of 2-3 years, we can see the expertise. And if something is produced by an expert, you really can't understand the tool. If it's done by a really expert, just you don't see anymore the artifacts of the tool. So I think this is discussion about that. I mean, okay, AI is nice to discuss, but what we think, because it's about our brain, you know, about our thoughts, that's why it's interesting to us. Like, we try to understand if something consciousness would happen. That's an amazing question. I love it, but I think this is far from debate yet. So, as a designer's perspective, the designer has to understand what tools they're using and what system in they're producing. So, I think this is the more important question. So, it goes back to Marshall McLuhan. So, first we shape our tools, then our tools shape us, is still very relevant, I would say.
Okay. Is it the fact that, for example, when we are using a knife to do something, we are okay because it's just a knife, but if it's a tool that's replicating our thought process, then it becomes suddenly personal?
What does it mean, replicating your thought process?
Our
because
consciousness.
But I think a knife could be conscious. And I think physical material does have consciousness in that way. It behaves to the other physical thing. It has a system. So this is like when you're creating a nanomaterial, this is very much like it, I think. It behaves differently to the other material. So when we think about consciousness, we praise ourselves. We say the human is the only conscious thing. I think the illusion is there. I don't believe that. I mean, I think there is that we don't define consciousness. We just talk about it, but we don't really define what it is. So I don't think like human is like more like a mirror of the things it sees. So when I talk to you and when I drink this water, you become a part of me, and this water is a part of me. So I think I accept human as more like a mirror. So I don't really agree with the idea of consciousness that much. So I think the tool has a part of the consciousness itself, because like when you take a photo with this phone, you have been dealing with all the people who has designed this in the history of human. They are part of you with this tool. I mean, it wouldn't be there without their knowledge. There was an art project in England. A guy tried to make a toast machine, which is like $3 or £3 in a supermarket. And he went to these mines, you know, to get. He had to make iron and steel, I think. So he just get permits to mine. He tried to mine and he couldn't make it. So then he just used some plants, boiled them and get some material. So he just tried to make a toast machine from scratch. Okay. And it took months, and you have to see the results. And it was so hard to make it. So like everything we use now has a relation to the whole human process, I would say.
Okay. But then it brings us to the very old question of creativity. Do you think AI can be creative enough so we can exclude it on the design process? For you, Jasjit. Our tools.
I think the tools are changing, and design, in a way, as a profession, is always steering through these different tools. So I really like the example what you gave about photography. It's almost like, you know, these days, like we were discussing also a little earlier, we say everybody's a designer. and I don't know how many of you agree with me, it's a challenge for us to answer that. And one of the things is because many of the products come supported with these cyborgs or these tools, and it's a challenge for us in the design process also. That back in the days when we were studying, this is the pre-Google era, by the way. We were actually going to markets, buying old magazines to do our visual research, and cutting them and pasting them. So, so I am from that generation, and I saw the change coming in front of me. But the message was very clear. And today we are in a situation where, as I'm talking, you can Google half the things, because many of you are holding your phones. You can just reach anywhere. So AI definitely is a tool which can help. But I'm coming back to that question. Is everybody a designer? In a larger sense, yes. Can we teach design methodology to everyone? Superficially, yes, but not in depth. And this reminds me of a book I came across back in the late 90s. Maybe many of you were not born also at that time. But it was called Techno Trends. And in one of the rules of Techno Trends, it said, give the user or your customer the ability to know something only if the user knows how to use it. Let's see if the interpreter does a good interpretation of this. But basically, there are people who think they can do it. It's almost like this photography thing, that people think that they've taken this picture, but actually they haven't. And that's where the difference of who is a designer and who is everybody a designer, that's where the differences will come. That's where AI will be both supportive and also, unfortunately, destructive. Because this is really a thing that I'm struggling with my camera phone. At times I'm seeing a picture, a view in front of me, but my camera is not giving me the option. Because maybe my eyes know better. I have a visual sensibility which has been taught to me through design by the analog design process, if you say that. But here is one tool coming from AI. Here is another tool coming from interaction design. And here's me sitting in the middle. What can I do to optimize both these things? What can I do that I can still send a very pure message? Because this is going to affect the society. If there will be a lot of AI in our education, in our experiences, we won't be able to differentiate between real and, as we call today, super real. We don't even call it artificial. That things will appear super normal. But I think somewhere we as design educators, we have a responsibility, because we are creating the new change drivers, as we call them, if you want to call them innovation drivers or transformation agents. We are creating the designers of the future. So we need to be very careful here, like what are we putting? Are we putting AI already in the process? So it's a very deep sort of topic, like what are the things to carry? What are the things to be given to the students? But in a nutshell, in design education, what would still remain is that you as designers, you need tools to draw. I think that should not go away, that you should have the ability to draw and visualize. You should have the tools to make. And you should also have the tools to imagine where AI can come. But still, we cannot teach you imagination. That's up to you. But we can probably give you tools to think and manage. That's where, all these the things you're talking about, that we can probably give them algorithms, we can give them platforms, but it's a very important thing for us that we also need to teach honesty and purity to the designers of the future. It's an ethical issue. Maybe I'm going a little bit away from the topic. We started with AI, but remember, it will have its own implications. So we have to do a very optimal sort of a mix, and we also have to realize what to keep. In certain aspects of design, education will remain the same, but of course, we have to be open to change.
Okay, great.
Can I add something?
Yeah, of course.
I just wanted, like, I was thinking on the perspective of a student designer, like a young person, how they could react to this change. And I think they have to read more science papers to really see what's behind these technologies. So the wisdom behind the tools are getting more sophisticated, but it's also getting easier to access these things. So we need transparency and accessibility to knowledge. So we don't create black boxes because we don't want the black boxes. We still want to understand what's going on behind. Mm-hmm. So I think that's simply that. I mean, we have to read more, test more, understand more. So that would save us for at least more 20, 30 years, I think. Maybe before it gets more sophisticated. I mean, it gets beyond us maybe, but not yet. I mean, I'm personally, like, as an artist or educator, I can access all the scientific materials, read them, and try to understand them, experiment with them, which should be a normal process of a designer also, I would think. And that's my personal perspective, but everybody should read a bit about what's going on behind. That's what I wanted to add.
Okay, great. Well, actually, that nicely brings me to the next question, which is, well, as designers, or people with design approaches, which I count myself as well, without being a designer, what can we do to cultivate the innovation culture in the city? How do we change the way we live? Do we change the way we interact each other? Do we change the way we have fun in the city? How would you approach to that? This is the question for everybody.
You can start.
You can start.
I think the idea of that, the lone genius, I sit somewhere and then I have an idea popping up in my head, is bygone. I don't think that era exists anymore. So all you come up with is a combination of what you have seen, read, and just witnessed, plus the people around you and what they have, like what do you bring to the table, really? And creativity and innovation are, not these mythical acts, as if like in the old Greek stories, the story of a creation, but much more. Probably more of a collage or a bricolage, bringing a lot of separate, disparate elements and entities together in new ways to form a new context and to form new experiences. And what that means in a city context is, I like the expression that you are the average of 5 people that you surround yourself with, So it's more so of who is around you and how are they inspiring you that will lead you to come up with interesting solutions, be it that small intervention in your apartment door to make life easier for the cats so that they sit on the side. It doesn't have to be grand, it doesn't have to have a big social impact, but it does serve a need.
It is a major impact on the cat.
Yeah, well, which, there's a lot of ingenious solutions to cats in Istanbul, maybe you have seen. They actually have very beautiful residences here and there. But more so, like for much more wicked, tough challenges that one may encounter, it's also who is sitting around the table. I think it really comes down to that. And what the city can do then is how, like as a city asking to itself, what am I doing to bring disparate groups of people together to address shared challenges? And one, for instance, answer that has been explored in many contexts is the idea of social labs, you know, because the idea of a designer coming from outside, interviewing just a small group, and then telling them this is what you need, also long gone. You know, that was a very old-fashioned mindset of, yeah, we'll fly to Africa and we know what they need for premature, you know, baby situations, and then this is the solution. 90% of the time they fail. So how do you build capacity within existing communities with the fundamental trust that everyone actually has the capacity to discover a need, frame the problem, and then at the least test and give feedback to solutions, and maybe only in that intermediate step you bring in some technologists, designers, and others with specialist skills to execute some of the prototypes. But it is maybe 80% citizen-driven, and the rest 20 is dealt with specialists. I hope that answered your question.
Actually, innovation today is much more complicated, requires cross-functional teams. On top of that, it needs to be quite often. So you cannot afford having innovation far in between, because pace is very fast. If you do slow pace, you will just go behind. I'm not saying serendipity innovation is out. It still exists, but you cannot rely on serendipity innovation, which I agree with that. Now, on the same question, Bager, is Iskele 47 is one of the players in the city. How do you see the role on creating innovation?
Okay, I remember how I started this idea, like when I went to Europe to do masters in art degree, I was like thinking they have some tools that we don't have. That was my thought. Like there were some genius people with some great tools so they can create things. When I went there, I thought there was nothing different. Seriously, nothing. Like I was in one of the really greatest art design schools in Europe, and there was an Ars Electronica museum next to us. It was really great, but there was almost nothing different. Only the people's attitudes was different. So I just tried to copy it. When I came back, I just said, okay, and not directly copy it, of course, just make a version of it like we trust with each other. So this is why we did a friend version of this creative harps. So we just said, okay, like 5 friends come together and hang out. And the only thing was like can we do something next to each other was our motto, like not together. Because in Turkey we have this, like we have to be together or we have to be separate. So we just said, okay, we can be next to each other. So that was the idea. But then I thought that it was like more like a creative hub idea and this, you know, this new way of working together, as Engin explained. But then when my daughter was like 4 years old, I started to think about how she can have a space like this for her school. So we started to research on democratic schools, and we opened a kindergarten in Kadıköy with a cooperative. And there we understood that this is something different, and I started to read more about these democratic schools and stuff. So I saw that like there should be a society which is peaceful and participatory. So this is like the base rule of anything, I would say. This is so like Engin, as Engin said, like Istanbul has a trust issue, and this is not like everyone has a trust problem. So these spaces are doing pulling people who wants to have trust with each other, who are more open to it, and create a space to enable that thing, make it possible. So I think this is the first rule. And we don't have to trust everyone in the country or in the world. We just accept like we have to be very happy with everyone. No, it doesn't start like this, because we already lost it. So we have to start some small groups which trust in their inner circle, which creates this peaceful thing, and show an example to others. Not like accepting others, letting them to create their own example. So it's not like the old spreading method. So I find a formula in my creative hub, now I can create it for all of you and I save everyone. No, this
it's not about growth.
That, exactly.
It's not about growth.
But it's about like you see something nice and working, and not great, but it's more safe and happy and fun, and you make your own copy. That's, I think, the only formula of a place that can have more innovation.
Well,
You want me to add? Okay.
if you add and if you give some perspective outside of Istanbul, obviously.
No, but coming from outside and looking at Istanbul, I mean, you presented a very good picture of the pros and the cons. I think every city has its own advantage. It has its own limitations, and Istanbul is not Barcelona, or it's not Stockholm, Helsinki. So the kind of things we are facing, I mean, we all have very local problems. And I won't even call them problems. Many of them are our advantages. Our social networking without the phone, the actual social thing, is a very big sort of a advantage factor we take with us. You mentioned about the cat, for example. This is also something. It may not be happening in other cities, not in Stockholm. It's too cold there. Yeah. But I think there can be some replicas, as you said, but we cannot do this McDonald's and Sheratons of innovation centers. I mean, there are D schools and other schools there. They're trying to go, but I think it has to be contextualized. That's where design will make a lot of difference. So I would say innovation definitely brings in a way of thinking, a new way of thinking, and how would you implement it. But what design or designers could do is that we as designers know empathy. We know how to make connections with the society, connections with the city, connections with the local problems. That's a design advantage. So it cannot be same, but different. Probably it is different. It's unique in every place. We are following a big process which is similar. But I mean, you could easily say that why go far? You try to do a design innovation center in Istanbul and try to replicate in Ankara, it won't. It will be different because the local problems are different. So that's where design can play a major role of how do we relate to the local users, how do we make things relevant for that particular city. And I think we have to think how differently and how much better we can do it in Istanbul. And that's applies to every city, that we don't make the same mistakes. We try to see what are our strengths, and we try to fix the problems in the model which cannot be implemented. How do we localize them?
Okay, thank you.
May I add something?
Of course.
Like this comes to this thing. It was very nice to hear from you, because like when we say Istanbul, it's also a big term to talk about. Like you cannot talk about the same thing. Like I would say Istanbul has many different faces, and we can accept it for many cities in the world. So like this idea of doing something all the world together, or doing something your personal thing, is the core idea. So like some stuff, like the internet and let's say the online courses, online knowledge transfer, like the videos and data, scientific papers, this is like a generalized version of how we can help it. You know, create different infrastructures for different personal solutions. And the second thing is just very local. So we have to, I think, go back to this old tribal ideas and understand what human is. Like city already as a design thing, it's not really much good for a human, I would say. It's not, I mean, human is not in the center of the city design, right? Human is just have to lure there because of money or like, you know, other optimization problems. So we have to think ourselves as like small tribes which interact with each other, which could be dynamic, you could be changing, but still like the whole big infrastructure is also important. Like in Turkey, one big problem of innovation is the lack of infrastructure. Like very simple, I can give you just very simple examples. In Turkey, upload internet speeds are very low. You cannot produce anything. In Turkey, there are still lots of bureaucracy in business layers. So there are many like infrastructure things. So what we are talking is not making them go away. These are still there. So we just have to keep in mind that just two things, like local problem solving and the global problem solving levels, and take both in consideration, I think.
Yeah, thank you. I think, yeah, time is up. Well, that concludes our design and innovation panel. As you can see, topic is broad, and our panelists are coming from broad range. And we can talk about corporate innovation system, to culture in the city, to education, and to creative hubs. They are all actually part of the whole topic of design and innovation. And the whole idea actually is how to make them work better and more efficiently. Now, we are open for any questions that you might have. Yes.
Hello, this is Tolga Korucu. I work for the Turkish National Commission for UNESCO as the Assistant Secretary General. The first question, I have two questions. The first question is, we understand that nowadays it's quite impossible to talk about innovation without mentioning the artificial intelligence. I mean, you don't even have to be a designer. I have Siri in my phone. I can call a friend without even touching the screen, right? But when it comes to design processes, I believe that the design processes will be exposed to standardization with the further development of the artificial intelligence. I mean, how do you keep the design processes unique when the AI is coming in the picture this strong? This is my first question. And the second one is that at UNESCO nowadays, we focus mostly on the ethics dimensions of the artificial intelligence. I know that artificial intelligence helps the companies or the organizations profit more and get the information spread faster. But let me explain with an example. In the recent years, when you go into the Google Translate, at first let me say that Turkish is a gender-neutral language, right? We don't have the words for he or she. We only use o. When I say o, it's a boy, it's a girl, it's a dog, it's everything. But when you go into Google Translate and you want to translate o engineer, the Google Translate translated as he is an engineer. But when you want to translate the nurse, the system translated as she is a nurse, right? So do you think this ethics dimensions of the artificial intelligence should be much more focused on in not just in international organizations, but the profit making, the profit organizations such as companies? Thank you.
Who would like to answer? Bagya?
Okay, so I think the AI is not, you shouldn't attribute it as like a factory. So 20th centuries was like, we have one t-shirt for everyone, and then we have two t-shirts, and then 3 models, maybe 4. But AI has to make it personal. This is what we are working on. Like, so you could customize it personally. It might be about your needs, it might be about your obsessions, it might be about what you want. It could be anything. So we are now working on these layers, I would say. So it's not going to make everything same, but maybe in an algorithmic way there will be a great formula, like a wiki. There would be maybe a Wikipedia of algorithms in the future, and it's gonna be open, which GitHub is already looking like that. But still, we're gonna make it more personal. So I don't think AI will make it more personal. That's for sure. That's what I believe. But the second one, I'm not really sure how to answer it, and it's a bit out of my range. Okay, I mean, we have to. AI is showing us a mirror to us, what we are, what our languages are, and so we have to look at the mirror and try to decide if we want to solve it or not. I think we should solve it, of course, but it's not about me only. So we have to find some structures to understand the problem, like, you know, because there are lots of already research for that now started, I would say.
I think one of the questions was, if I am not mistaken, because AI is, at the end of the day is a code. Yeah. Will it kill the creativity because it's just bounded in a code?
What is creativity?
Good question.
Yeah,
Please,
I mean,
go for it.
This is the problem. Like, I mean, if you cannot define creativity, then
you still have time until 8 or 9 today, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's not easy to answer these questions. These are very big questions, but we have to go with examples. I mean, I don't think any tool can kill creativity. I mean, there's this, I can remember, there is a Dutch architect who was thinking about if everything is solved, you know, everything, like, we have money for everyone, food for everyone, how would the city would look like? And it was amazing about this thought experiment, because now let's look around, everything looks like each other, right? All the chairs are same, all the glasses are same, all the tables are same. I think there will be diversity. It's gonna be like nature. I mean, if we solve these infrastructure problems, then diversity and creativity will rise for sure. That's
Okay.
what I believe.
Jasjit, you want to add something? Sure.
Kişi iki soru sorar ve 3 konuşmasız cevaplarsa adil olmaz. Çünkü hem zaman yönetimi açısından hem diğer arkadaşlar...
If there are other questions, yes.
Ben soru sormayacağım. Başkasına soru gelmez.
Is that...
Sanki doğru olmaz.
Okay. Could you just shortly elaborate, because the gentleman is saying that probably we will run out of time before we
Yes,
give...
definitely, I agree. I'll just answer your first
Okay.
part, and I would say that design processes or the methodology would be frameworks to basically moderate how to bring in these different layers of, like, sometimes it will be AI, sometimes it will be something else. Design process should stay independent of such elements. Of course, these things are going to change. I said already that we have to allow change, but certain things have to remain very much like the core. That this is what we do, this is how we do. Fundamentals will not change, and AI would only bring in advantages in some cases. Some cases you can't really apply them.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? I am not able to see because of the light if there is any hands. Is there? Ah, yeah, okay.
It's a very exciting session. I want to ask about the issue of copyright in terms of maker movement and design issues. Like, it's a big topic, but maybe shortly.
It's coming to you, Bagher.
Okay.
Like it or not.
Okay, I mean, there's this great movie, Everything is a Remix. I don't know if you have watched it, then you should watch it. It's like, copyright was a tool to protect the author than the person who copies without any effort. It's to save the author, because the author goes to a mountain, it works for like 3 years, writes a book and publishes, and then you copy it. So that was the idea of it in the beginning, like to save Charles Dickens so he can write nice stories. So that was the real idea. But it turned more like who holds the power can change the copyright, which is not, I'm not happy with it. Like US now, just the Hollywood, Walt Disney, they're not playing nice with these copyright rules. So I'm in the favor of the ones which are more like accepted as illegal, I would say, like the Alexandre Elbakyan or Aaron Schwartz, you know, the Sci-Hub, like opening the barriers of at least this creation. So there has to be lots of discussion about this, because if it's a benefit or not. Like, for example, why don't we just open all the science papers? And would this really hurt science academy? Just things like this. So this is my personal view.
Short sentence. It's my personal opinion, although. Maker movement is very basic, ground or grassroots level, and I think it should be open source. We should not bother about copyrights.
Okay. Very precise answer, thank you. Any other questions? I think there isn't. Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for my panelists. Thank you very much.
Değerli misafirler, oturum başkanımız ve konuşmacılarımıza paylaştıkları bilgiler için teşekkür eder ve plaketlerini takdim etmemiz için sahnede kalmalarını rica ederim. Değerli konuşmacılarımıza plaketlerini takdim etmek üzere İstanbul Büyükşehir Belediyesi Deprem Risk Yönetimi ve Kentsel İyileştirme Daire Başkanı Sayın Gökhan Yılmaz'ı sahneye davet ediyorum.